War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. There are only two things we should fight for. One is the defense of our homes, and the other is the Bill of Rights. War for any other reason is simply a racket. It may seem odd for me, a military man, to adopt such a comparison. I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. Looking back on it, I feel I could have given Al Capone a few tips. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small, inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many.
Welcome to Unstacking the Deck. I'm Jason Robo.
And I'm Kyle Beatty.
And this episode we have for our guest Bruce Gagnon. He's one of the leading members of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And our show topic is on advanced military technologies, which the average person like you may not have heard of.
Yeah, we go back into the history of NASA, where some of the missile technologies and space technologies come from, who's involved in its first discoveries, and also, of course, bringing you some of the most outrageous news stories from around the world.
This episode's word is technocracy.
A theory and movement prominent about 1932, advocating control of industrial resources, reform of financial institutions, and reorganization of the social system based on the findings of technologists and engineers.
The Greek roots of the word mean skilled rule of, and it was coined by W.H. Smith in Industrial Management as a name for a new system of government by technical experts. And so this means like a skillful rule of, like the kind of things that Karl Rove was an expert in, is analyzing data and knowing how to manipulate certain voter turnouts and whatnot.
Yeah, it's not a system of government where you're just ruled by some king or some people who have their bloodline stuck. You're actually ruled by people who are experts in ruling people.
Yeah, and getting you to rule yourself for them, and that's what generally we tend to do when we buy into all these systems that are set up for us. They're completely fixed and managed by these elite.
And Carol Quigley, who we've talked about on the show, mentioned technocracy quite a bit, discussing that they would basically be the new rulers since the end of World War II.
And so we're going to get deeper into that in this show.
And now to start this episode's North Coast News.
First story, Klamath River fish disease is spreading. This is from the Times Standard by John Driscoll. It's discussing the habitat that is formed along the Klamath River due to the dams for these certain worms. There's the spread of disease. It's pretty bad. The story explains that higher flows, if given to the river, could help wipe out this habitat, and that when the salmon go up the river to spawn, their dead bodies actually, get a bunch of this worm, which is fed by the nutrients from the reservoir created by the dams. And this is actually something that could be of concern because we have the first sports season fishing a salmon in some years, and if we really want to take care of these rivers, that perhaps removal would be the appropriate solution to it. But who knows? There's been a lot of parties interested in it getting irrigation, and that's our next story.
From the Associated Press, Klamath Irrigation cut more than half to help fish, and they basically cut most of the water that is used as irrigation for the farming. They're sending about 30% of normal irrigation. This year they said they're going to try and up it to 50% by getting water from other sources, but it looks like they've cut way back on the amount of water that farmers are going to be using this year.
Next story, and some more environmental conservation style news, natural resources. A spirited crowd confronts supervisors over Richardson Grove. This is coming from the Humboldt Herald, and talks about the chairman limited a 1 minute period per person to speak and only 30 minutes for the entire comment period. The large crowd in attendance was the result of successful grassroots organizing, and somebody in the crowd said, "We work hard to elect you, we pay you well, and you threaten to clear the room." The chair relented for an hour and 45 minutes, and people continually demanded that the issue of Richardson Grove be put on the agenda so supervisors can halt the project. The supervisors didn't say whether the project would be put on a future agenda, but Clendenin said that the board was listening. He says, "We hear you."
Our next article is of a video which was shot by Thomas Dunklin and Will Harling up on the Klamath River of some green sturgeon. Now these are super giant fish. They get to about 6 feet large or so. And the Klamath River is actually one of the only areas where they breed in all of California. And the algae that you can see in the video clip, if you go check it out online, is all from basically the excessive nutrients that there is, which is due to elevated water temperatures, which is basically because there's less water in the river in total, so it heats up quicker and easier. And has essentially been causing this algae problem, which you were just discussing in the
Another
last
one from the Humboldt Herald. We have Stephen Pepper on short sea shipping. He says that a crane would cost about $4 million for us to start a short sea shipping port, and that the cost remaining can be spread among all participating ports on the savings of goods and whatnot. And it would require less market share from any one region.
The Siskiyou Land Conservancy also endorses the short sea shipping, and this is coming from the Siskiyou Land Word Press, and they say that Eureka actually's harbor could be turned into a good port in order for fixing and repairing old ships, and in order to basically cut down on a lot of the trucking that's going on. They say it could be up to 5 times more efficient to be going by these short sea trips, down to the Bay Area, to Los Angeles, rather than taking, big freight and everything like that on trucks.
Cool. Hopefully that they're nice, efficient boats, because there was a pretty gnarly story I saw before about barges being pretty toxic. But
well, they also said that the fixing of all the barges and repairing and building of new ones would have to be done. It has to, by law, be done in an American port, and so it would create a lot of jobs probably.
Next up, we've got Moving the Mud Around from the Humboldt Herald. It's talking about Schmidbauer's log deck that's kept down on the Eureka Balloon Track property owned by Arkley. And basically, as a consequence of having this stuff stored there and these, machinery moving them around and whatnot, the toxic dioxin stew is being stirred up and moved around, dispersed. And it's pretty nasty. It's kind of like a cancerous generating region that just sits down there in Eureka, and so when it's muddy, it gets moved around by the tracks and whatnot up and down the roads, and it's pretty heinous stuff. If you want to look up PCBs and PCP, it's some pretty gnarly stuff. I had to actually stop reading because it was just so disturbing when I was reading about these chemicals, but they're pretty horrible stuff for you, and I'd be really angry about it if I lived down in Eureka. That place should be cleaned up and taken care of, and we should stop doing this to our planet, pretty much.
Yeah, also out of the Humboldt Herald, B of A sues Arkley for $50 million, and Bank of America is indeed suing Rob Arkley's company, actually a subsidiary of one of his companies, of Security National. Sequoia Funding Trust is the company who had a loan basically taken out from Bank of America, and they've been having problems essentially with it, and so Bank of America is now suing the Arkleys for $50 million, and that'll be going to court and will be being covered in the local news here to come.
Yeah, it's like he promised to pay, so they're calling.
Yeah, he gave them the what was called in the contract the Arkley guarantee.
So much for guarantees. Next up, we have Time Standard barred from depositions. This is regarding the harassment case by Tawny Nelson. Depositions were halted regarding the city's reaction to her complaints about some harassment. And in January, they stopped the proceedings, had Thaddeus Greenson from the Time Standard leave during testimony of Mayor Virginia Bass. And apparently this ruling says that we can get transcripts, but it's not for certain whether the Time Standard is going to invest in them. Our next story is going to get into that, but it's unfortunate because you can't be there to see their actual physical responses, because body language is a pretty powerful thing, and the sincerity of people's words.
Yeah, continuing with the Humboldt Herald, Times Standard parent corporation exits bankruptcy protection. Affiliated Media Incorporated is now largely owned by Bank of America. Affiliated owns Media News Group Incorporated, which owns the Times Standard. And essentially they did this deal where Bank of America, along with other lenders, is now going to hold about 89% of Affiliated's common stock. The entire empire will remain under the control of Dean Singleton, who is also chairman of the AP, the Associated Press. So quite an interesting conflict of interest going on there. And it shows that even down to your smallest local level, in cities across the whole country, it's basically run by a small group of these elites, you know.
Speaking of things being run, we've got how to buy a Bass appointment. Virginia Bass supporters have accused Bonnie Neely's campaign of buying favor from the longtime supervisor and Coastal Commission chairwoman. But it turns out that in 2006, campaign disclosure from the Bass for Mayor campaign gives a sneak peek into how Virginia operates. And following a donation of, quote, office rent to the campaign valued at $4,500, she appointed Neyland resident Lee Olancey to the Eureka Planning Commission. And it says that to make room for Olancey, Bass pushed aside qualified commissioners who wanted to continue to serve, justifying the unusual move with the inarticulate defense about new blood. And so the article concludes, so what can those developers / hum CPR supporters expect from their generous monetary support to the Bass campaign if she wins? Favors, apparently.
From the Times Standard, a grand jury recommends reducing Humboldt supervisors' salaries, and the supervisors' challenge findings say there will be a detailed response to the report. And from the Times Standard, the grand jury report lists 3 recommendations for moving forward. Supervisors reduce their salaries starting in fiscal year 2011, and thirdly, that they set up a grand jury that would provide guidance on appropriate salary levels for the Board of Supervisors, along with some type of methodology for adjusting the levels. They say that the supervisors' salaries essentially are way too out of hand. They're not in line with what other counties that are local to us are making, and they've been squandering the money for themselves. The supervisors disagree and say that they're going to be coming out with a report which will contest these allegations.
See how that turns out. Try and get back to y'all on that. Next up, we have another Times Standard story. Eureka businesses increase awareness in response to robberies, by Donna Tam. It turns out that businesses are increasing their vigilance when it comes to security, it starts off saying, in response to all these robberies we've had. As our economic crises worsen, we're going to have to expect crime as a consequence to get more intense, rise in intensity. And that's the sad truth, and we have to understand that we can't necessarily just rely on the law. As a middleman for your security, you have to be prepared and take necessary precautions and whatnot. And also there's a lot of studies that show that crime goes down when you're prepared to deal with these criminals. But it has some tips for deterring robbers, is increasing visibility, keeping cash registers away from doors, watching display merchandise closely, and other tips. So check it out if you have a business so you can be vigilant.
Out of the Times Standard, reward offered for Eureka pharmacy bandit. Cloney's Pharmacy on Harrison Avenue has been the target of 2 narcotics robberies in 1 week. On April 19th and on Monday, a white man in his 20s brandishing a handgun and demanded store employees hand over bottles of the pain reliever OxyContin. So this stuff is going on all over the place, all of this kinds of crime. This article by Allison White from the Times Standard, Humboldt County schools look to 2010 census to help boost funding. And this is discussing the need for people to fill out their census forms in order to try and get the federal funding that's coming in. And really what this has shown is how bad it is, how bad of an economic depression we're in, how bad the situation is, that everyone's relying on the federal government and funding from the federal government just to survive right now. And they even admit in the article that only 16% of California residents have returned their 2010 census form, and they say they normally have about a 70% return rate, and the rest of them, people have to go knock on their doors. So They were basically urging people to try and fill out their census forms, saying that we need the federal money.